A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to my Weird Prompts. I am Corn Poppleberry, and we are coming to you today from our home in Jerusalem. I have to say, the air feels a bit different today. There is a stillness in the Judean hills that stands in such sharp contrast to the digital noise we have been wading through all morning. We have been looking over a prompt that our housemate Daniel sent our way, and it is a heavy one. It is one of those topics that hits incredibly close to home for us, living where we do. But it is also a global story about the health of Western democracies and the fragile state of pluralism in the 21st century.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are right, Corn. It is a vital conversation, though a deeply uncomfortable one for many. Daniel was asking us to look into the situation in Ireland, specifically, how the Irish state has positioned itself as perhaps the most vocal and uncompromising critic of Israel within the European Union, and the very real, very dark consequences that rhetoric is having on the ground for the tiny Jewish community there. We are looking at a situation where political posturing is creating a permissive environment for something much more ancient and uglier than mere policy disagreement. We are talking about the normalization of antisemitism under the guise of human rights advocacy.
It is a fascinating and troubling paradox, right? You have Ireland, a country that prides itself on its history of resisting oppression, its literary greatness, and its modern commitment to human rights. It is a nation that sees itself as a moral beacon, yet it seems to have developed this massive systemic blind spot. They claim to treasure their Jewish minority, which is tiny, maybe only a few thousand people, but the facts on the ground tell a completely different story. We have seen reports confirmed as of March 2026 of a 60% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in Ireland just in the last year. That is a staggering, terrifying number for such a small, integrated community.
It really is. And today we want to unpack what we are calling the righteousness shield. This is the core of our analysis today. It is the idea that Ireland uses its own historical trauma, specifically its history under British colonial rule and its self-assigned moral high ground, to bypass the kind of scrutiny that other nations face when their public discourse veers into hate speech. We are going to compare how Ireland handles this versus the United Kingdom, where we have seen actual high-profile legal intervention against public figures and artists who cross the line into inciting hatred. We are also going to look at the second-order effects, like the brain drain of the Jewish community, which we actually touched on back in episode 972 when we talked about the last minyan in Ireland.
I remember that episode vividly, Herman. It was heartbreaking to hear about families who have been in Ireland for generations, people who consider themselves Irish to their core, suddenly feeling like they no longer have a future in Dublin or Cork. But before we get into the demographics and the exodus, let us talk about this framing. Why has Ireland become the tip of the spear for anti-Israel sentiment in Europe? It feels like it goes beyond just disagreeing with a specific military operation or a specific government policy. It feels like it has become part of the national identity.
It is absolutely systemic, Corn. To understand it, you have to understand the Irish self-image. They see their own history through a very specific, almost binary lens of the oppressed versus the oppressor. They have mapped that historical grievance directly onto the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a way that is often historically inaccurate but emotionally very powerful. In their minds, they are the eternal underdog, and because they identify so strongly with the Palestinian cause, they feel that their criticism of Israel is inherently righteous. This is the shield. If you believe your cause is perfectly moral, you stop looking at the tools you are using to advance it. You stop noticing when your rhetoric starts borrowing from the oldest anti-Semitic playbooks in history. You stop seeing the personhood of the people you are criticizing.
Right, and that righteousness acts as a silencer for any internal critique. If a member of the Irish Parliament, the Dáil, stands up and uses language that would be considered a career-ending scandal in London or Washington, it is often met with a shrug or even applause in Dublin, because it is seen as speaking truth to power. But the problem is that this vitriol does not stay in the halls of Parliament. It is not contained in a vacuum. It migrates. It moves from the television screens to the social media feeds, to the streets, to the universities, and eventually to the front doors of Jewish homes and businesses. When a government uses the language of demonization, it provides a vocabulary for the mob.
And this is where the comparison with the United Kingdom becomes so instructive and, frankly, quite damning for the Irish state. We have seen the British government take a much more proactive, legally grounded stance. Take the case of the artist Bob Vylan. In the United Kingdom, there have been high-profile legal moves and investigations into conduct that incites hatred or celebrates violence. The British legal system, for all its faults and the debates over free speech, has a framework for saying, okay, you have free speech, but you do not have the right to incite violence or spread racial and religious hatred that puts a specific community in danger. They recognize that words are the precursors to actions.
It is a sharp contrast, Herman. In the United Kingdom, there is an understanding that words have consequences and that the state has a duty to protect all its citizens from targeted harassment, even if that harassment is wrapped in political art or activism. But in Ireland, the government seems to hide behind this idea of sham neutrality. They claim to be neutral arbiters of peace, but their official state rhetoric is so one-sided and so inflammatory that it effectively greenlights the harassment of their own Jewish citizens. They are essentially saying, we love our Jewish neighbors, we value our history with the Herzog family and the Jewish Lord Mayors of Dublin, but we are also going to spend every day accusing the world's only Jewish state of the most heinous crimes imaginable, without any nuance, context, or right of reply. You cannot maintain a safe environment for a minority, while simultaneously painting their ancestral and spiritual homeland as the ultimate evil in the world.
You hit on a key point there, the lack of nuance. When you look at the rhetoric coming out of the Irish Dale, you see a total collapse of the distinction between the Israeli government and the Jewish people as a whole. We talked about this boundary back in episode 743, the fine line between criticism and anti-Semitism. In Ireland, that line has been completely erased. When state officials use words like genocide or apartheid in a way that is clearly intended to demonize rather than describe, they are signaling to the public that this is a cosmic conflict between good and evil. And if Israel is evil, then anyone associated with it, even a Jewish person in a suburb of Dublin who has never even been to Israel, becomes a legitimate target for anger. They become a proxy for a conflict thousands of miles away.
And that is the rhetorical creep we wanted to discuss. It starts as a political critique of a state entity, but it very quickly becomes about the identity of the people associated with that state. We have seen Jewish-owned businesses in Ireland being boycotted, not because they have anything to do with the military or the government in Jerusalem, but simply because of the identity of the owners. We have seen Jewish students at Trinity College Dublin being told they are not welcome in certain spaces, or being subjected to litmus tests of their political beliefs just to participate in student life. This is not about policy. This is about exclusion based on ethnicity and religion. It is the definition of a hostile environment.
It really is. And what is so frustrating is the institutional failure to address this. Ireland has officially adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, but they seem to treat it as a polite suggestion rather than a standard for governance. When incidents occur that clearly meet the IHRA criteria, such as holding Jews collectively responsible for actions of the State of Israel, the Irish state often demurs. They frame it as a free speech issue or a passionate political expression. But as we saw in the United Kingdom with the Bob Vylan situation, other democracies recognize that there are limits. When your expression creates a hostile environment for a protected group, the state has to step in to maintain the social contract. Ireland's refusal to do so is a choice. It is a policy of neglect.
It makes me wonder about the trade-offs they think they are making. Does the Irish government truly believe that by being the loudest voice against Israel on the world stage, they are somehow helping the cause of peace? Or is it more about domestic signaling? Is it about maintaining that image of the moral revolutionary for their own voters, even if it means sacrificing the safety and well-being of a minority group at home? It feels like they are trading the security of a few thousand Jewish citizens for the applause of a radicalized base in international NGOs.
I think it is the latter, corn. It is a form of performative morality. It is very easy and politically cheap to condemn Israel in a Western democracy. It costs you nothing with your base, and it makes you feel like you are standing on the right side of history. But the cost is paid by the Jewish community. This is why we see that 60% spike in incidents. When the state provides the vocabulary of hate, the public provides the action. And because the Irish state is so reluctant to prosecute these cases, or even call them out forcefully, there is a sense of impunity. If the leaders are saying these things in the Dale, why shouldn't the person on the street say them to their Jewish neighbor?
That sense of impunity is the most dangerous part of a permissive environment. If I am a radical and I see that I can scream anti-Semitic tropes in the street, or post them on the windows of a synagogue, and the police will just stand there because they do not want to be seen as suppressing political speech, I am going to keep doing it. I am going to get bolder, and that is exactly what we are seeing in Dublin. It is a breakdown of civil discourse. It is the transformation of a liberal democracy into an echo chamber where the only acceptable view is one that excludes the Jewish perspective entirely.
And it leads to those second-order effects we mentioned earlier. If you are a young Jewish professional in Dublin or Cork and you see this happening and you see your government effectively cheering it on through their rhetoric, what do? You do not stay and fight a losing battle against a state apparatus. You leave. You go to London, you go to New York, or you come here to Israel. This is the demographic decline we are talking about. Ireland is losing its pluralism. It is becoming a monoculture of thought. When a minority community that has contributed so much to the fabric of a nation begins to vanish, it is a sign that the nation's soul is in trouble. We talked about this in episode 972, the tragedy of the last minyan. It is not just about numbers. It is about the end of a 1,000-year story because the environment became too toxic to breathe.
It is the architecture of hatred, as we discussed in episode 962 regarding other regions. But here, it is happening in a stable, wealthy Western democracy. It is a slow-motion tragedy. The Irish government says they treasure their Jewish minority, but you cannot treasure a community while simultaneously dismantling the social fabric that allows them to exist. If you make it impossible for them to be Jewish and Irish at the same time, you are effectively ending that community's history in your country. You are telling them they are guests whose welcome has expired because they refuse to denounce their own identity.
And let us talk about the institutional capture for a moment, because this is a key part of the Irish situation. It is not just the politicians, it is the non-governmental organizations and the academic bodies. Ireland has a massive network of NGOs that are heavily funded by the state, and many of them have become absolute echo chambers for this anti-Israel vitriol. They have a massive influence on policy and public opinion, and they operate with almost no accountability when it comes to the impact of their rhetoric on the local Jewish population. They frame everything through a post-colonial lens that leaves no room for Jewish indigeneity or the reality of the threats Israel faces.
This is where the idea of sham neutrality really comes into play. A truly neutral state would look at the rise in hate crimes and say, we have a problem here that needs to be solved regardless of our foreign policy views. A neutral state protects its citizens first. But because the Irish state has tied its national identity so closely to this specific radical foreign policy stance, they cannot admit that their rhetoric is causing harm. To admit that would be to admit that their moral high ground is actually a swamp of bias. So they double down. They claim that any accusation of anti-Semitism is just a bad faith attempt to silence them. They play the victim while the actual victims are being harassed in the streets of Dublin.
That is the ultimate defense mechanism, isn't it? To say that the victim is actually the aggressor for pointing out the hate. It is a classic gaslighting technique. And it is why the United Kingdom's approach, while certainly not perfect, is so much more honest and robust. The British government acknowledges that they have a problem with anti-Semitism, and they take steps to address it through the legal system and through public discourse. They do not claim to be perfect, but they do claim to have a responsibility to enforce the law and protect the vulnerable. Ireland, by contrast, claims to be the moral conscience of Europe, while the house is burning down around their Jewish citizens.
So what happens to a society that goes down this path? If Ireland continues on this trajectory, what is the endgame? We are already seeing the demographic shift. We are seeing the loss of international credibility among those who actually understand the complexities of the Middle East. But what does it do to the internal health of the Irish democracy? How can you call yourself a liberal society when you have effectively sanctioned the marginalization of a specific ethnic and religious group?
It erodes the very foundations of a liberal society, corn. A democracy depends on the protection of minority rights and the maintenance of a shared reality. When a state allows a specific group to be dehumanized for political gain, it weakens the protections for everyone. It sets a precedent. Today it is the Jews because they are a convenient target for this specific post-colonial narrative. Tomorrow it could be any other group that falls out of favor with the prevailing political winds. Once you normalize the ability to ignore hate speech because it serves a political goal, you have lost the ability to defend the rule of law. You have replaced justice with ideology.
That is the canary in the coal mine. Antisemitism is almost always the first sign that a society is turning away from reason and toward radicalism. It is a recursive loop. The more the state uses this rhetoric, the more the public accepts it, and the more the state feels pressured to go even further to satisfy that public. It is a race to the bottom where the prize is moral purity and the cost is the safety of your neighbors. We are seeing a Western democracy voluntarily enter a dark age of prejudice because it feels good to be the loudest critic in the room.
And the consequence of this sham neutrality is that Ireland loses its ability to be a productive player on the world stage. If you want to be a mediator, you have to be respected by both sides. You have to show that you understand the legitimate concerns and the humanity of all parties. But Ireland has become so one-sided, so blinded by its own righteousness shield, that no one in Israel or the wider Jewish world takes them seriously as a neutral actor. They have essentially outsourced their foreign policy to the most radical elements of their domestic politics. They have traded influence for a megaphone.
It is a tragedy for Ireland, too, because they have so much to offer. They have a rich culture and a history of peacemaking, like the Good Friday Agreement, that really could inform peace efforts elsewhere if it were used constructively and with humility. But instead, that history is being weaponized. I think back to the Bob Vyland case in the United Kingdom again. The state there essentially said, "Your art and your expression do not give you a pass to incite hatred or target a minority." That is a clear, enforceable boundary. Ireland needs to find that boundary again, and they need to find it fast.
They do. And it starts with enforcing the laws they already have. It starts with a top-down change in rhetoric from the Dowie Sach and the Dale. It starts with acknowledging that the 60% increase in anti-Semitic incidents is not a fluke, it is not a statistical error, and it is not just a reaction to foreign events. It is a direct result of the atmosphere the government has helped create and sustain. If they truly treasure their Jewish minority, they need to stop acting like their disappearance is an acceptable price to pay for a few points in the polls or a standing ovation at the United Nations.
Well, let's move into some practical takeaways for our listeners, because, as we always say, this isn't just an Irish problem. It is a case study for something we are seeing across the West, though Ireland is currently the most extreme example. One of the first things we should all be doing is learning to distinguish between legitimate policy critique and identity-based harassment. It is not that hard to do if you are honest about it. If the language being used relies on ancient tropes about power, money, blood, or global conspiracies, or if it targets people for their identity rather than their specific actions, it has crossed the line. We have to be the ones to call that out in our own circles.
And another takeaway is to watch the legal and institutional responses. As a citizen in a democracy, you should be asking your representatives how they are enforcing hate speech laws. Are they being applied consistently? Or are certain groups being given a pass because their targets are currently politically unpopular? The consistency of legal accountability is a major barometer for the health of a democracy. If you see your government making excuses for hate speech by claiming it is just passionate activism, that is a massive red flag. You should be looking for the UK model of intervention rather than the Irish model of indifference.
I also think it is important for people to monitor the health of their local minority communities. If a community that has been part of your country for centuries, like the Jews in Ireland, is suddenly backing up and leaving, you have to ask why. Do not just take the government's word for it when they say everything is fine and they are a welcoming society. Look at the numbers. Look at the stories of the people leaving. The demographic decline of the Irish Jewish community is a loud, clear warning that the social contract is failing. We need to listen to those warnings before the community is gone.
And finally, we have to challenge the idea of the righteousness shield. Just because a cause is framed as being about human rights or anti-colonialism does not mean it cannot be co-opted by bigotry. In fact, those are often the most effective covers for prejudice because they are so hard to argue against without sounding like you are against human rights. We have to be willing to look past the slogans and see the actual impact of the rhetoric on the ground. If a human rights movement is making a specific minority group feel unsafe in their own homes and shops, it has lost its way and it has become the very thing it claims to oppose.
That is a powerful point, Herman. It is about intellectual honesty. We have to be able to hold two thoughts in our heads at once. You can care about the plight of people in the Middle East and also care about the safety of your neighbors in Dublin. In fact, if you truly care about human rights, you have to do both. You cannot pick and choose which groups deserve protection based on your political preferences, or which conflict is trending on social media. True morality is universal, not selective.
Right. And if Ireland wants to reclaim its role as a respected member of the international community and a true moral leader, it has to start by cleaning up its own house. It has to show that its commitment to human rights applies to everyone, including its own Jewish citizens. It has to stop using its history as a shield for its current failures. Until they do that, their claims of moral leadership will continue to ring hollow to anyone who is actually paying attention to the facts.
It is a sobering thought to end on, but it is a necessary one. We are seeing a Western democracy use its history and its neutrality as a mask for a very modern and very dangerous form of prejudice. And if we do not call it out, if we do not analyze the mechanisms of this sham neutrality, it will only continue to spread to other nations, looking for a way to bypass their own responsibilities to their citizens.
It will. And I think it is important for our listeners to realize that this is why we do this show. We want to peel back these layers and look at the mechanisms behind the headlines. Ireland is a case study in what happens when a state loses its moral compass while claiming to be the world's moral arbiter. It is a warning for all of us about the fragility of pluralism in the face of state-sanctioned vitriol.
Well said, Herman. This has been a deep one, and a personal one for us. We really appreciate Daniel sending this prompt in. It is a conversation that needs to happen, and we are glad we could have it here with all of you. Before we go, I want to remind everyone that if you are enjoying these deep dives, please leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It really does help other people find the show and join the conversation about these difficult topics.
It really does. We love hearing from you and seeing the community grow. You can find all our past episodes, including those ones we mentioned today, like episode 979 on the Irish Antisemitism Report and episode 972 on the Last Minyan, over at our website at myweirdprompts.com. We have an archive there that goes back years, and you can search for any topic you are interested in, from legal frameworks to cultural shifts.
That is myweirdprompts.com. We are also on Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. We've reached over 1,000 episodes now, and there is so much more to explore. We are not slowing down anytime soon because the world keeps giving us these complex, weird prompts to unpack.
Definitely not. There is always another layer to peel back and another shield to look behind. All right, I think that covers it for today. This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Herman Poppleberry.
And I am Corn Poppleberry. Thanks for listening, everyone. We will see you in the next one.
Stay curious and keep asking those tough questions. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from slow